Carter and Blake grew up under the same roof, in the same house, with the same two parents trying to do their best. This is why it didn't make sense that these boys slowly became completely different kids. One grew louder, pushed the limits, the other grew quieter and folded into himself. And you would never notice this in a single family photo. Everyone always had warm smiles, matching pajamas, and it just looked like two happy little boys growing up side by side. And if you walked down their halls in their house, nothing would seem unusual. They had a routine, it was nice and steady, their rules were clear, and their parents were consistent. The confusion only showed up in small ways, like the way the boys talked to each other, or the way the one boy reacted when someone corrected him because he didn't believe rules applied to him, or the way the other boy held his breath because he was always afraid of disappointing someone. But if you paid attention, something felt off, like something didn't line up, but no one understood why. The teachers couldn't explain it. The family couldn't explain it. Even the boys themselves didn't have the words. It was only clear that something had gotten into this family, in the middle of this family, something subtle enough to miss, but something strong enough to split, just tear apart two brothers growing up side by side in the very same home. And to understand what happened, we have to go back to the very beginning. It started on a Saturday, June 14th, 2016. The sun was just beating down, like the summer heat, when John and Morgan pulled into their driveway with two brand new twins in tow. Their tiny little bodies all scrunched up in their car seat, just getting swallowed up by those secondhand blue hats that were slipping off their ears. John opened the car door to get Carter out when he heard his mom, Elaine, just screech from the front porch, "There are my sweet boys." He didn't even get Carter fully out of the car before his dad, who smelled like fresh cut grass, because of course he was mowing before John and Morgan got there. He has to be useful. He came in, scooped up Carter. Elaine got to Blake, and they just almost staked their claim with the twins right then and there. That first week, everything's a blur when you come home with a baby. And at first, John and Morgan felt like, oh, thank gosh we have John's parents, because Morgan's parents, they live hours away. They have twins. They don't know what they're doing. They're exhausted. So at first, this felt like a blessing. But then 3 days later, at exactly 8 a.m., everything shifted. Frank and Elaine unlocked the front door and let themselves in. They didn't call. They didn't knock. They didn't ask, can we come inside? They just walked in. They brought a haul of groceries, 2 packages of Pampers, and they ushered John and Morgan to go to bed. They're like, you go rest. We got the kids. And something in the house changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even something that either John or Morgan could name. Frank cuddled Carter on his chest. Elaine had Blake up against hers. And Morgan was watching them, and she was trying to convince herself, be grateful. Like this feeling that you're feeling right now of just discontentment. You don't want to walk away from your kids. It's just like a new mom thing. She tried to talk herself out of it. And she promised herself, she'll just go and sleep for an hour. But years later, Morgan would write that was the day their home stopped feeling like theirs. What she didn't know yet was that many small moments like this were still coming, each one nudging this family in a direction that she wasn't even aware of. By July, everybody in the neighborhood knew Frank's old orange Jeep. He came on Tuesday afternoons, Thursday mornings, and then one Friday, he showed up at 7 a.m. just to drop off burp cloths and see the boys. But he never left quick. Elaine liked to tell people that he just did pop-ins, but his pop-ins lasted for hours, and Morgan missed her privacy. One day she went up to her old reading nook just to kind of get away. She moved some dirty bottles, a mucus sucker, and she tried to just sit and breathe for a second, but she heard Carter start to fuss on the monitor, so she knew she only had a second. So she sat down, opened up the baby journal. She just wanted to keep track of some of the things and how she's feeling, because everything is just a blur. So she wrote on the top of the page, July 21st, 2016, the boys napped, they ate, they were wiped, they were held, but the house is so busy, I forgot who did what. I'm grateful, but I miss the moments that I used to be able to breathe. She would try to tell herself, they're just trying to help. They're giving me a break. And she would repeatedly say to herself, be grateful, be grateful, be grateful. But every time she would repeat those words, a little piece of her instinct was quieted down. And that's usually what happens. Like we start to talk ourselves out of our instincts. Then started the chronic babysitting. On a sleepy Sunday morning in mid-August, Elaine hugged Morgan so tight and whispered in her ear, like, remember, you're still a couple. Like, don't just be parents. Go out, reconnect. We got the boys. John and Morgan were so exhausted and overwhelmed. They could not protest. They just were like, okay, yes. They handed their 2-month-old boys over, drove to a local coffee shop that just opened up a mile down the road. The coffee shop smelled like bread and vanilla. It was just delightful. But Morgan was in her head. She was trying to convince herself that the tightness in her chest she was feeling was just because she left her babies for the first time. But deep down, she knew something else was pulling at her, something that she couldn't name, something that wouldn't be named for much later. But for now, she just kept telling herself, be grateful, you need a break too. Heading into the winter months, routines ruled the house. Morgan had taped up like nap schedules, feeding schedules, all of that. And then she also posted up on the walls, like no honey before 12 months, no screens before 18 months, as if she was trying to set reminders that everything could work if everyone played along. But rules only work when everyone in the child's life agrees to follow them. But on December 12th, the house smelled like infant cereal. Morgan walks into her kitchen and sees Frank slipping a spoonful of honey into Carter's cereal. She's like, Frank, oh my gosh, the pediatrician said no honey until 12 months. So she's warning him. And then Frank does that charismatic smile, winks at her and says, oh, honey, we've raised kids. They turned out fine. You worry too much. But dismissal like this, that's disguised as reassurance. He's trying to reassure Morgan like everything's going to be fine. It's one of the easiest ways to just erode a parent's authority. And then you have Elaine coming every visit, handing Carter her phone so we could have a few minutes of Daniel the tiger. Morgan would try to remind her, okay, remember, it's 18 months, no screens. So she would remind Frank and Elaine why the rules exist. She would write them down again. But if they didn't agree, they would just ignore her and do what they wanted to. I mean, the rules might as well just been written with invisible ink. After each visit, Morgan would call her mom just exhausted, and you can just feel the resentment brewing, but she wouldn't even dare say that, but she would be like, I say no, they say yes. Like, why do I even try? John started hiding out in his home office, working later, ducking out of the chaos. I mean, he was home in it all the time, but he really didn't want to be confronted by Morgan, who was growing more and more impatient with his parents, like really didn't like that they weren't following the rules. He would just say, they're trying their best. This won't last forever. Just let them help as long as they're interested, kind of thing. And then he would close his laptop as if like closing his laptop was ending the conversation. But you got to know, when two parents are not aligned, kids, no matter how old they are, they can feel it, even if they're not old enough to articulate what they're sensing. And Morgan wanted to believe him. But every night when she was, rocking Carter asleep after another temper tantrum, guilt was just pressing into her more and more and more, like something's wrong. Mid-morning on June 12th, 2018, blue balloons bobbed in the kitchen. Morgan could smell warm cake and buttercream frosting when Elaine set a tall blue frosted cake in front of the twins. Their cheeks are just so pudgy, their eyes are big, and they dug their hand into the cake before anyone could stop them. Now, Carter, he's laughing, he's having a blast. Blake's just kind of like sitting here looking at his hands. He doesn't really like to be messy. And Carter takes his hands and smears it down the front of Blake's shirt. Morgan quickly, moves to action because she knows her kid, knows he doesn't like this, so she's going to clean him off. And Frank interjects, oh, calm down, mama. Like, this is what brothers do. Let them be. Well, Morgan didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to, cause any trouble on the birthday. So she stepped back. She's like, okay, well, can you please just wipe off his hands? He doesn't like to be messy. Now, whether or not Frank heard her, Morgan felt like he ignored her, just winked at Carter, and they kind of like turned Morgan's worry into a private little joke. But while Carter was licking his fingers, Blake just looked at his mom and he was just like, all done. So Morgan grabbed him and went and cleaned him up. By late May 2022, summer had already settled in. Like, it was so hot, making the days feel heavier. And Morgan decided now was a good time to go back to work. She had a really small flower shop on Main Street, a little hand-painted sign that she made herself with overflowing buckets of peonies, tulips, and eucalyptus, always coming home with her hands smelling a little earthy. She loved wedding season. Orders were stacking up. She had a new assistant that was slow but eager to learn. Business mattered. They needed the income. And for the first time in a long time, Morgan felt like a piece of her was finally returning. And any parent that has tried to balance identity and childcare, you know that feeling of that first breath when you realize, okay, I'm still me. And then her childcare, like her daycare, fell through. The owner called Morgan in the middle of her morning rush, explained how 2 of the staff members just got up and quit. They had no backups, no coverage, and there was just no safe way to stay open, and that they were going to close indefinitely. Morgan just stood there among her flower buckets with the cool scent of eucalyptus coming up to her nose as she was breathing in, trying to steady herself. Like, there weren't many options. She couldn't close peak season, not when every bill was going to be dependent on her income. John couldn't cut back his hours. They were already stretched too thin. And Frank, being newly retired, stepped up almost immediately. I can help. I'll help. Like, I'm so bored. I need something to do. Seriously, Morgan, it's no big deal. I've got all the time in the world, and the boys would love to be with me. Now, John, he called this plan perfect. He thought, okay, good. I can keep working from home. Dad already knows all the routines. He can be here with the kids. We know how this all works. Maybe I could even get a little bit closer to my dad for once. Morgan tried to trust the plan. Each week she would leave to go for work, and she would tell herself, like, this is my lifeline for my mental health. Because every time she shut the door, that knot in her gut would twist more, and it would whisper, like, is this really okay what I'm doing? On July 20th, 2022. So Morgan's been back to work for a couple months. Things are going good. She's getting ready for her usual routine, putting stuff in her bag, gonna leave soon. Frank is out in the backyard, putting up a slip and slide, hollering for Carter to get back out there, when Blake comes up to Morgan with his small hands and just hangs on. And so she just gives him a kiss, reassures him that it's going to go by quick. She'll be home soon. And then she'll give him extra cuddles tonight. She could hear Carter outside with the hose, spraying the house, all the windows, just kind of with wild abandon, just trying to pretend to be Grandpa. Grandpa used to be a firefighter. So he's doing that. She's just like, okay, they're going to do a slip and slide. Everything's going to be fine. She leaves for work. After her shift, she still feels heavy. She comes home, finds Blake sitting in his bed, all tucked in, just quiet, doesn't really talk to her. And so that night she told John, like, something's wrong, like something doesn't feel right. And John just reassures her that, oh, Blake's fine. He's just always been a mama's boy. Like, he's fine. He just missed you. However, that night, Morgan had to get up, change Blake's sheets because he wet the bed, hadn't done that in a really long time. And she wondered to herself, what's causing this? Like, I thought we were past this. It's been a year since he wet the bed. Fast forwarding to fall. The red and gold leaves are blanketing the lawns. Everything just looks softer. Morgan decides, okay, tonight, we're just going to have a calm, fun evening, just the 4 of us. We're going to carve pumpkins. So John is out in the garage getting the pumpkins all, gutted out and stuff like that. So he's taking care of that, covering the tables. Morgan is inside making it a little bit fun. So getting candies in bowls and all the carving stuff set out, but far away from the boys. And she's trying to get the kids to have dinner, but Carter's just not having any part of it. He just keeps going, getting up, walking around, playing with his toys, spouting off to Morgan, sneaking candy, just kind of being a little terror. Finally, Morgan's like, gosh, I just wanted to have a fun night, but she loses her cool, loses her patience, and decides to give Carter a timeout. As she's ushering him to his bedroom, he just starts flailing, and he looks at her with such venom, and he says, Grandpa told me I don't have to listen to a thing you say. And she was just startled by the way that her kid was looking at her with such venom and hatred. She was just shook up. She almost lost track of what she was doing. She unfroze, got him into his bedroom, shut the door, and inside of Carter's room, Carter was screaming like, I hate you. I love Grandpa. I want Grandpa. And in the midst of all this chaos, John comes into the house. His hands are all, full of pumpkin stuff. So he's cleaning them up on his jeans. And he's like, ugh, this again? Like, maybe we should call Jen. Jen being Carter's behavioral therapist. Morgan just wants to scream at the top of her lungs. All she wanted was just a family night, a calm family night for once, with no drama, no tantrums, nothing, no Blake crying, just a family night. And she doesn't scream. She ends up just sitting down by the door outside of Carter's door. Blake can't see her, and she just puts her head in her hands, and she just starts to cry. The new school year dropped like a stone on August 28th. It was a Monday. Carter and Blake started 2nd grade. 2 classrooms, 2 new teachers, no holding hands in the hallway for the very first time. But everything seemed normal at first, at least for the first few weeks. But then on September 20th, it was lunchtime, Carter slid into his spot in front of everybody, and he dug into his pouch of his bright orange sweatshirt, and he pulls out a candy bar. Pulls out a candy bar, waving it around so everyone can see. Blake, he got excited because he knew it was from Grandpa. So he opens up his lunch pail or his lunch bag, hoping to see the same thing, but he just got peanut butter crackers. Now, Carter just keeps waving it around to everybody. He's opened it up now so Blake can smell it, and he's going really like in front of his nose, like, did Grandpa give you this? I don't think so, you big baby. So he's just kind of taunting the bar in front of Blake. Blake tries one, like timid grab, but he misses, and the boys are laughing around him. So he's trying not to cry. So he's biting his lip. It's a trick he taught himself a while ago. He just digs into his applesauce and tries to just get through lunch. But somebody was watching. Miss Saunders already had started to see a pattern of Carter pushing around Blake at lunch. So she was there. She saw it. She hustled over, confiscated the candy bar, and then ushered Carter to the principal. After Carter talked to the principal's like, okay, no candy, don't tease Blake, all this stuff. He sat in the principal's office while everybody else went out for recess, having fun. And this is what Carter did. So he had his arms crossed, and he was just like kicking in the chair, and he was just like, just wait till my grandpa hears about this. Like, he thinks these rules are stupid too. So that's what he thought about it. And that afternoon, a note was sent home to Morgan and John, just stating that Carter continues to tease Blake. Blake is, withdrawing, and that please, please, please stop sending candy to school. Winter rolls in, and Carter's behaviors are just getting worse. More aggressive, more venom when he talks to John and Morgan, like just showing hatred. He's getting way more aggressive with Blake, just taunting him as many times or as much as he possibly can, just almost like torturing Blake in a way. But tonight is the Thompson's annual gingerbread competition. So John and Morgan bundle up the kids. They go to Elaine and John's house. And when they walk in, Morgan just gets that smell of sharp ginger, buttercream frosting. And Blake, sits up on his little chair. He's lining up the gumdrops one by one, very methodically. He's very focused when Carter swoops in and snatches his bowl of frosting. He kneels up on his chair, so he's taller than his little brother, Blake. Blake is trying to say, give it back, give it back. And then Carter's like, make me, you little baby. Morgan, being in John's house, at his parents' house, nudges John. John springs into action, reaches back, locks eyes with Carter, and instructs him, give Blake his frosting back. And Carter, just like unflinching, looks at him and says, fine, I'll give the baby his frosting back. And he just like tossed the bowl down, just kind of like mocking him. And John just hissed quiet underneath the crowd, like, you're heading for a timeout if you keep this up. Carter just shrugged and laughed at him. He goes, why should I stop? Like, Grandpa thinks he's a crybaby too. John, patience are gone. He gets up, grabs Carter, kind of barrel, hugs him like this, heading down to the guest room. That's where they stay when they sleep over all the time. Heading there, and Carter starts shouting, I didn't do anything wrong. Grandpa, Grandpa, I didn't do anything wrong. And from the kitchen, Frank's voice bellows, hey, what's going on down there? John tries to explain to his dad, who's butting into his parenting, but Frank just put up his hand like to silence him. And he's like, John, they're just being boys. They're just being brothers. This is what they do. Don't make a scene. This is Mom's big night. Then he turned to Carter and said, come on, champ, take me back to the table. Show me your gingerbread house. Carter goes back to the table, but he makes sure to slam his shoulder into Blake, like so hard that Blake's hand knocked into his gingerbread house and it all tumbled over. He didn't even want to try anymore. He just said to himself, like, what's the use? He slid down off of his chair. His house is just in shambles, and he went to the other room to build Legos. It was a week before St. Patrick's Day. Cold rain battered the school windows as John and Morgan took their seats in those two small plastic chairs in Carter's classroom. The fluorescent lights just kind of hummed above their heads, and they were waiting, just bracing themselves for what Miss Saunders was going to talk to them about. They were waiting all week for this meeting, and when she began, she was firm, direct, And she just said it as it is. She's like, Carter keeps pushing the limits. He's up, moving around, doesn't listen during the lessons. He's very disruptive, teasing kids in class, taking things that are not his, but he is relentless in his teasing to his brother Blake, whether it's in the hallways, at lunch, even at recess. And Blake, he is getting quieter. I talked to his teacher. He's getting quieter, more withdrawn. He doesn't ask for help. It's almost as if he is trying not to be noticed. John and Morgan just sit there. John's twisting his ring. Morgan thinks back to the night before where she's, comforting Blake. He had soaked his pajamas again, talking about a nightmare he had. It's a reoccurring nightmare where he's at his grandparents' house, Grandma and Grandpa, Elaine and Frank, where he's looking for Morgan and he can't find her. Morgan brings her mind back into the classroom and she just looks at Miss Saunders and says, what else could we do? Like, we have tried everything. What is your insight? He has a behavioral therapist. We've tried everything to help Carter. And Miss Saunders didn't skip a beat. She said, honestly, it looks like the adults are not on the same page in this house. Carter does not believe rules matter. And if you guys get on the same page, I really believe you will see a lot of this go away. They go outside, still speechless. They're not talking. They're entering the school parking lot. The March wind is just howling through them. They're getting pelted with some freezing rain. Morgan just keeps thinking about the way Carter looks at her. Like every single time she tries to enforce a rule, Carter looks at her with so much venom and rage as if she's some type of enemy. And this is the moment right here where the truth starts to finally crack open everything. Even if John and Morgan don't fully understand it yet, it's coming and it's coming quick. And we already know what happens after that. They don't know what's going on until they pull into their cul-de-sac. They see Frank's orange Jeep Cherokee sitting in the driveway, waiting for the boys to get off the bus. And that's when they click everything together. The teacher is right. 2 sets of rules, all that. But they know they can't have the conversation that day. He's already there, yada, yada, yada. Well, the very next day is a Saturday, and Elaine calls or texts them a message asking if they can do quality time, take the boys to the bakery, give them like an hour and a half to just be kid-free, get some chores done. Elaine is always thinking about that stuff. Morgan knows that they have to have this talk, but she looks over at this mountain of laundry and, looks at that, looks at the filthy floors. Spring is really hard to keep your floors clean, thinks to herself, oh my gosh, it's been a really long week. I can listen to my true crime podcast, kid-free. Yes. So she agrees. But while John is gathering the jackets by the door, Blake sprints over and just wraps himself around Morgan's waist, and he's not letting go. So she bends down and he just whispers, please, Mom, don't make me go. Her heart just lurched, into her throat. She raised her head and said really steady to everybody else, like, Blake actually wants to help me today with the laundry. You guys go back, you guys go ahead. We'll see you when you get back. When everybody got back, Frank handed Carter an extra donut, ruffled his hair. Elaine set out 2 of Blake's favorites, his donuts with white frosting, extra sprinkles, set in front of Blake. Blake thanked her, but then grabbed the plate and went and sat by Morgan, just never letting her go. That night, the house felt heavier than ever. Morgan sat on the edge of her bed, reaching for John's hand. His hands were just shaking, and she barely whispered. But what she said was, I think we made a mistake letting your parents get this close. Like, we can't keep pretending like everything is fine. Our kids need us. I think we need to take a break from your parents having so much time with the boys. John, he just closed his eyes so tight, just fighting the urge to look away, and he just nodded. And for a moment, neither one of them breathed. They were just like soaking in with that decision. I mean, John had never crossed his parents before. No one really had. I mean, not since he said no and quit baseball, but he never really thought he should say no to him. But something now deep inside of him was twisting, like a storm was brewing. All the words he swallowed, all the moments he felt invisible as Carter and Blake's dad, he knew all of that. All of that was about to break. Neither of them slept that night. They both felt it. It was unmistakable. The calm was over and something very big was about to change everything, and it was coming straight for them. The Wednesday after the meeting with Miss Saunders, John's phone buzzed. Just a message from his mom, Elaine, asking for a double sleepover with the boys that weekend. The text looked harmless, but John felt his stomach twist. For a second, he thought, maybe I could just ignore it. But before his fear could get the best of him, he quickly started, his thumbs typing out a message. He just said, actually, Mom, Morgan and I had a meeting with the teachers. They're very worried about the twins. They're thinking that like, the biggest cause of Carter's behaviors is the different set of rules. So dad's rules versus our rules. So we're just going to take a month off, no sleepovers or babysitting, just to reset, try to help the twins get back on track. He hit send before he could change his mind. Heart pounding, but at least it's done. What happened next was kind of like a spark in dry grass. Elaine didn't see we're trying to help the kids. She saw they're taking the boys away from us. And within hours, she shared her version with Frank, Mindy, her sister Tina. And it didn't take long where suddenly John and Morgan weren't just enforcing a rule. They were up against a full-blown family mob ready to bulldoze their boundaries and drag them back to how things always were. I mean, some families unite around the truth. Others unite around a story that protects the most fragile ego. The first week without Grandpa felt awful, like raw and endless. After Frank tried to force his way into the house, Carter just turned restless. He was wandering the hallways, opening every door, peering inside as if he was searching for something he had lost. Most nights he wouldn't eat. He just picked at his food, pushed his plate away. He would then grab his ball and just hurl it at the wall, shaking the picture frames, knowing he was going to get in trouble, screaming, "I want Grandpa, not you." He would then stomp off to his room for the timeout. He knew it was coming. He would just stomp off all by himself and just sit, alone. Morgan did her best to stay calm and patient and soft, unshakable. But some afternoons, oh my gosh, the cracks showed. She would just slip into the bathroom, close the door, shaking, trying to calm herself. And she would just press her hands so hard into her mouth, trying to muffle like just the sounds of her sobs. 3 weeks in, it was just a gray, overcast Sunday. The four of them are on the living room floor playing with Legos. Blake had built something cool, so he was like, "Look, Mom, look at what I made." Carter, his eyes just narrowed. He got up, went through the circle of them, just completely demolishing what Blake had just made. John and Morgan were just like, "Carter, why would you do that?" Carter just shrugged his shoulders, started to turn away, but John was already moving towards him, scooped him up. Carter just kicked and thrashed and screamed down the hall as he was being taken to his room, and he was just yelling, "I hate you, I hate you, I want Grandpa, where's Grandpa?" Morgan just sat frozen in the floor. There's just this ache in her chest. At that moment, the house felt so hollow, every room was echoing with what was missing, which was Frank. By May, the storm finally started to break apart. John was joining every single family dinner. He was stopping working so late. He would do, bath, bedtime routines, all that. Sundays was strictly family time, riding bikes, playing outside, doing lots and lots of family stuff. In June, out of nowhere, Carter asked John to build a Lego castle with him. John smiled. "Oh my gosh, yeah." Put down his phone, started playing with him. At that point as well, Blake had stopped wetting his bed. He had a 10-day streak. Morgan continued to track everything in her journal. She had the baby journal. Now she just has a journal. Carter helped Blake. They laughed together. They fought a little bit, but sounds just like brothers. Those quiet evenings felt precious, even like a blessing. But underneath all that relief, she still had the ache. She just kept looking at the calendar and the holidays just getting closer and closer. Grandma and Grandpa stayed silent. They never apologized. They never changed their story. Their story about John and Morgan being the bad guys still echoed loudly in the group chat, twisting all the facts, keeping the minion mob angry. And outside of those two sit-downs that John and Morgan tried to have with Frank and Elaine never reached out to her son. She stood proudly next to Frank, and she allowed backlash to just wash over her son and his family. As October slipped by, the jack-o'-lantern started sagging on the porch. The twins began asking questions. Will Grandpa and Grandma come over for Christmas this year? Will we ever be able to build a gingerbread house with them again? So one morning, Morgan and John, they were sitting across from each other at their kitchen island, just steam coming up from their coffee mugs. The air felt really heavy. They could tell they were going to have a conversation. Morgan looked up at him and said, "I think it's time to try again. I think therapy is helping us, and the boys need to see that we're trying. We're continuing to try. And so no matter how much this hurts, they miss their grandparents." John just stared at the ring his coffee had made on the counter, and he just nodded slowly and whispered, "I don't know why they can't take responsibility. I just don't know, but maybe third time's the charm. Maybe they'll finally listen. So tomorrow, I'll send the message, I promise. On the night of November 16th, 2023, John and Morgan steered through puddles towards John's childhood home. Inside, Frank was in the hallway standing with his arms crossed, zero smile, just stone-faced. Elaine was sitting on the sofa, pressing down. She likes to press down her slacks when she's nervous. Morgan's stomach is just twisting. She tries to do some gentle smiles, but everybody is just holding their breath. They are trying to be hopeful, but yet they're full of dread because every other meeting so far has been an epic fail. This was the moment the entire story had been moving towards, even if no one realized it. Would this finally be the night where everything turns around? Would Frank and Elaine finally step up, take some ownership, break the cycle at last? Or would this just be another hollow meeting? A year of empty seats at Christmas, a holiday season marked by silence that hurts way more than any fight ever could. The truth was waiting in that living room, and once it arrives, nothing about this family would ever look the same again. Next time, it's the family showdown set right before Christmas. I will see you there.